and it's my pleasure to be doing this debate with Suzanne. This may come as a surprise to some of you, given our obvious differences, but we have a connection. Suzanne is very close friends with my wife's parents, and was at my wedding. So I just say that so you appreciate the constraints under which I'm operating. Unless I'm rigorously fair and accurate, it could get back to my in-laws. Chatham House rules, I guess. So I have been passionate about proportional representation since I was a teenager in high school. I was a little odd in high school, and I still am. Not odd, but passionate about PR. My view is that this referendum and electoral reform and proportional representation represent a huge opportunity to strengthen our democracy and improve policy making, just to broaden the range of new ideas and a chance fundamentally to liberate us to vote our values. I want to make the case for you that our electoral system is broken and that moving to a system of PR would fix that. I hear a lot of fear-mongering on the no side, and I hope to dispute many of those claims. So first of all, what's wrong with our current first-past-the-post electoral system? Well, I'm in a law school, so Exhibit A. Sorry about that. The thing is, first-past-the-post is actually the exception globally among democracies. There are really only a few major democracies that still use it. There's the US, there's the UK, there's India and Pakistan, a few smaller former British colonies, and there's us. And look at the record. Trump lost the popular vote, but he is president, and there are alt-right elements that live in the White House. Look at the most recent Indian election, where Modi and the BJP won a majority government with 31% of the vote. This is a far-right Hindu nationalist party. Exhibit B, the latest Canadian example. So in Ontario in June, you have the Doug Ford Conservatives won 40% of the popular vote, won 61% of the seats, and so 100% of the political power. And then just this week, François Legault's CAQ wins a majority government with 38% of the popular vote, riding an anti-immigrant policies to victory. So first past the post doesn't just help anti-immigrant parties win seats. It sometimes grants them government. And so this is the problem of false majorities, where we have parties that consistently score under 40% of the popular vote but command majorities. A core check on the power of these false majorities is supposed to be the courts. And yet both of these new premiers have indicated their willingness to invoke the notwithstanding clause to see their policies through. Some quick BC electoral history. First of all, the distortions in the current system cut both ways. In 1996, the NDP lost the popular vote, but the Liberal vote was less efficient, and so the NDP won a false majority. 2001 is an interesting one. 2001 is actually the only time in the last half century that a governing party won an outright majority of the popular vote. Gordon Campbell won 57% of the popular vote that year. But remember what happened, those of you who are old enough. It was a wipeout. He won every seat in the legislature except 2 in East Vancouver. The NDP lost official party status. That's not healthy in a democracy. You want Her Majesty's loyal opposition to hold the government to account. Then 2005, 2009, 2013, the Liberals win false majorities. It is the norm. Another problem with our current system is that it forces people to engage in strategic voting. Strategic voting means not voting your values. Effectively, our elections get reduced to this two-horse race. The bandwidth of choice and political discourse is narrow. And we feel forced to vote strategically, not for what we want, but against what we most fear or dislike. That's not real choice. If you're a free market-oriented person, but you're frustrated with the BC Liberals, you currently have nowhere to go except to hold your nose or opt out. Or if you're a lefty voter, but you're frustrated with the NDP, you currently have nowhere to go but to suck it up or sit it out. First past the post limits real competition. It also results in the fundamental problem of wasted votes, and that plays out in a couple of ways. First of all, most of us live in safe ridings, where the outcomes are foregone conclusion. And so people feel, why bother voting? And sometimes it's hard to blame. But consider this. In the last BC election, just a little over a year ago, of the 1.9 million votes that were cast, 1.1 million of them, more than half, were cast for a candidate who lost. And the next day, those votes evaporate. I am convinced that we have the creativity to have a democracy in which that doesn't happen, a system that allows all of those votes to find their desired political expression. From a policy point of view, first past the post produces this problem called policy lurch, meaning as power and false majorities swing between two parties, each new government spends a chunk of their first years essentially undoing the policies of the previous government, and so the pendulum goes. If you want to see what I mean, look no further than Ontario and the way the Ford government's undoing the wind policies, or the way Trump undoes Obama, or Trudeau undoes Harper. It's inefficient, and it's bad for business. Imagine if you're a green energy person in Ontario, and you've invested millions of dollars only to have the new Ford government undo the policy context in which your decisions were based. In contrast, because minority governments are more often produced under PR that require compromise across parties, they are more likely to produce policies that have broad appeal and that stand the test of time. Powerful piece of graffiti. All told, I contend that the current system is having a harmful effect on our faith in democracy. And that disillusionment is part of what's part of these long-term downward trends in voter turnout. Canada, within the OECD, ranks 26 out of 34 countries in voter turnout. And so how would switching to pro-rep fix what I just walked you through? So first of all, what is it? Very simply, it's not a single system. It's a principle. There are numerous pro-rep models, but they all have in common this. Your share of the popular vote is reflected in your number of seats in the legislature. They're stable because you have policies that are built to last, that avoid that policy lurch. And they're successful to note that 9 out of 10 of the top economies in the OECD use some form of PR. Almost always PR produces minority outcomes. I think that's great. It forces cooperation. Parties have to put together governing alliances that in combination reflect the majority of voters. If you want to know what that looks like, you can see it now in BC with the alliance between the NDP and the Greens all laid out transparently in the confidence and supply agreement. A common argument against pro-rep is that it produces governments that can't get anything done. It's not true. Some of our nation's most popular and long-lasting policies, old age security, CPP, Medicare itself, are all the product of minority federal government. But on a related point, I believe it also produces more accountable government. I like minority governments because I would contend they're more accountable. That in the current system outcome we have now in BC, the NDP, the Greens are holding the NDP more to account than if the NDP had won an outright majority. But it's deeper than that, I think. If you only need 40% to govern, you don't need to concern yourself with the other 60. And I would contend, as someone who's, I'm mostly active in the poverty reduction front. And when I think, like, why did the last government, why was it content to let welfare rates be frozen for 10 years? Or why did it drag its heels so long on the housing affordability crisis? I hate to say it, but I think they made a calculation that the people most impacted weren't part of that 40%. The point is, when every vote counts, every vote matters. And on the policy front, what we actually know from the evidence is that by many measures, PR countries produce better policy, and in the words of Allard Hall, who's really the global authority on comparative electoral systems, that they produce more caring and gentle societies. What we know from the research is comparing across the OECD between PR versus majoritarian or first past the post or winner-take-all systems, is that PR countries have less inequality and the results are highly statistically significant. PR countries garner higher scores on the United Nations Index on Human Development, incorporating health, education, quality of life indicators. Overall, the empirical research across those countries shows us that PR outperforms winner-take-all systems on measures of democracy, quality of life, income inequality, diversity among elected representatives, values of tolerance, environmental performance, and fiscal policy. And the evidence is also clear that they perform better in terms of voter turnout, about on average 7 percentage points better, and for young people 12 percentage points better. Most democracies in the OECD use some form of PR, and yet we're told it's too complicated. I don't think we're stupider than these good people. And given the fact that most democracies use PR, it's fairly easy for people on the no side to cherry pick examples of one country or another facing some challenge and try to pin it on the electoral system rather than any number of other factors. Now, we're not going to have time in the opening to go through the different systems. We will in discussion, I'm sure. But they all share these common features. First of all, they're all a huge improvement over what we have now. There's no wrong answer. They all produce proportional outcomes that reflect what we actually vote for. They not only preserve, but I would say enhance local representation. They all improve the diversity of the legislature. They all ensure no region of BC will have fewer MLAs than it currently does. They're all innovative made in BC models that reflect our unique needs and geography. None of them would significantly increase the size of the legislature. That's capped at 8 more seats. They all include a minimum threshold of 5%, so a party has to secure 5% to get seats. And if you're still feeling unsure or nervous, there's this piece here that the current Attorney General has also committed to, which is a second confirmation referendum after 2 elections and a new system. We just tabled legislation this week to embed that in law. I think that's great. We get to road test it. We get to see it in practice instead of just theoretical. And if people don't like it, they can vote to go back. So there you are. In sum, I think we deserve to have a democracy where we are liberated to vote our values and to vote for what we want, not against what we most dislike. There are many, many reasons to vote yes. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I came to UBC Law School, actually. You said you had. I'm a graduate of this law school. So, pleasure to see you today. So, a lot of students and some non-students. I'm faster than half this way. How many of you know who your local MLA is?
Don't know or no?
Do know? Yeah, most of you. And how many of you know where your local MLA's office is? Many of you. So, because I'm at a law school today, I thought I would focus on justice. And to me, to change our voting system is a matter of justice, and it falls on the wrong side of the equation. Let's go back, since you are students of law and students of history, all the way back to the Magna Carta. That was 800 years ago. And what the people of England said, or in that case it was the powerful, the lords of England at that time, said to the king was, "Not so fast, king. We're keeping the power decentralized, thank you very much." And so they did keep power to themselves around the countryside at that time. Over the many centuries after that, the power started to devolve to people. People started to acquire the power, to take the power, to demand the power, to demand the vote. First it was landed people, then it was all men, then it was all women. And in fact, in Canada, the final set of voting authority was not until 1960, when First Nations people on reserves finally got the vote.
Finally. Yeah.
That was a long, long stretch between 1215 and 1960.
Yeah.
And what that did was that gave everybody a vote. And you know what that vote does? That is a direct link from you to the people in front of you on the election day to the person who goes to Victoria. That is a straightforward link between you, the voter. You look at the candidates in front of you. How many of you have gone to all candidates meetings and assessed candidates? Many of you. And certainly when you vote, you look at the candidates. You assess them for their character and leadership. What have they done for your community? If they're running for re-election, have they done a good job for me? And yes, you include their political party. But you don't only vote for political parties. Some people do. I shouldn't say. I'm not making too many generalizations here. Some people always go for the person. Some people always go for the political party. And some people say it depends. So it's never a vote only for the political party. What proportional representation wants to do is it wants to sever that link between you and your MLA. And it wants you to place your vote with the political party instead. So the mixed member proportional, which seems to be the one that is most likely to prevail in British Columbia, should it prevail at all, which I hope it does not. But the mixed member proportional, we know so little about these votes. You might get one vote or you might get two. You might get one vote for the person and one vote for the party, or you might only get one vote for the party. I can't tell you. Seth can't tell you. Nobody knows, because it remains to be worked out after the vote. But in any event, the important vote is the vote for the party, because there will be some MLAs around British Columbia, about half of what there are now. So whatever you think you have now, you will have half. The other people are plugged in all around BC to fill in the gaps, to represent their political party, to achieve that blissful state of proportionality. So if you have some NDP plugged into Kamloops, for instance, who are they responsible to? Who are they accountable to? Are they accountable to local voters who didn't vote for them? Or are they accountable to their political party? Because right now, every single MLA in British Columbia is responsible to you. You all have somebody who answers to you and who is accountable to you. And if you don't like them at the next election, you can organize with your neighbors and get rid of them. That is the fundamental accountability that we have right now. And it's a fundamentally just system that has evolved over many centuries, and it is a good system. I like the way that these guys have stolen our label, by the way, simple, stable, and successful. That was our logo, and they're using it now, so that's good. It's always a compliment when the opponents use your things, but simple. We have a very simple system here right now. Every one of you could explain it. Not one of you can explain any of the three systems that are proposed here.
I'd like to differ.
Our system right now.
I would make a difference.
Our current system you can all explain. The new systems no one can explain because they are not. They're
You
not
want an
actually,
explanation, Susan?
They're not actually explainable because if you go to the Elections BC website, you'll see they say this, this, and this, and then these things remain to be decided later on. So they are not actually explainable. So that's an item of justice number one, which is that breaks that fundamental link from you to your MLA, to the person, you to your vote, to the person who sits in Victoria. The other injustice in this is the process. Seth and I did a CBC piece this morning, and between our CBC piece this morning and being here at UBC Law School this at noon now, I went and spoke to I was invited to go speak to some Chinese seniors. Do you know what they understood about this process? Not a thing. Not a thing. And I felt really badly for them because I was trying to explain it to them. And it was very, very difficult to even begin to say that you're going to get this vote in the mail. I had a translator. But that you're going to get this vote in the mail, that you're going to be asked to vote on the system. I can't tell you, nobody in that room understood what they're going to be asked to do. And that's not just. Seth referred to Gordon Campbell. When Gordon Campbell was prevailed upon to undertake a process leading up to the first vote in 2005, he put together a citizens' assembly. They worked very hard. They studied the issue very carefully. They heard all kinds of expert opinion. And they came to the conclusion that we should have STV. The vote did not pass the referendum requirements at that time. So he said, okay, we'll do the vote again.
They got
So they
59% though.
They spent another few years leading up to the vote in 2009, and at that point, the Citizens Assembly had worked really hard. They had maps, they had information, they had explanations. You could understand how it worked, and it was voted down pretty resoundingly by the citizens of British Columbia. People could understand what was on offer then. This process now is rushed. People do not understand what's on offer, and I can guarantee you I was in a room full of people this morning who did not understand it. And that is not just. It is not right to ask people to vote for a system which you cannot describe, which Elections BC, in a valiant effort, has said, here's what mixed member looks like. It looks like this, this, and this, but these things remain to be decided later. We don't even know in mixed member if there will be one vote or two votes. We know nothing about how it will work, except that people will be on a party list and they'll be moved around British Columbia to fill in proportionality around British Columbia. So I do not think that this is a just system, and I think that as law students and as citizens who pay attention to these things, it is not a just system. It's not just in the way it works. It is not just in the fact that people cannot understand what's on offer. Let me finish on this piece of it with one other thing. Maybe none of that would matter if it turned out well. But it does not turn out well. We have to compare ourselves to Northern Europe. If Seth wants to start picking examples from around the world, I can point to South Africa and Indonesia and countries which are really in trouble. But let's stick to places that are more comparable to us. So let's pick Northern European countries, I would say. I think that that's a fair enough comparator. They are, all of their political parties, they're splintering. So Holland, which has 10 million voters, has 13 political parties in the legislature. It took them 200 days to form a government. Sweden, right now, just had an election. They don't have a government yet. They're still negotiating. They have a party that has Nazi roots, flagrant Nazi roots, which has 20% of the vote, nearly 20% of the vote. So they're in a pickle there because they don't know how to form a government, but it's still a little bit early days for them. The record is held by Belgium. It went 589 days without a government. Actually, the record is actually in Northern Ireland, although Northern Ireland has other considerations, but it's gone 600 days, 18 months without a government, because people can't get on. So all that lovely picture of all those people getting on, that was a very nice picture. But it's not playing out that way in PR democracies around the world. We have a very stable system in British Columbia right now. We have a fantastic province. We have a successful province. We have a system that's simple to understand. We have a system that everybody can understand how the votes are counted and how the people are elected. Any of you who have scrutineered know exactly how the process works. It's very reliable. Everyone knows how it works. It's not some mystifying formula, which is what the PR proposals are. They'll all be some kind of formula. There is no reason to change. We have a system that works. We've got a stable province. Let's keep it that way. Let's not ask for trouble, which is what proportional representation would bring to us. Keep our province simple, stable, successful, the best province in the world, the best place there is. No reason to change it. Nothing broke. Nothing needs to be fixed. Thank you very much.
Okay, where to begin? But it is nice to have 8 minutes to rebut. So first of all, let me start where Suzanne started on the question of local representation. I care about local representation. I think most British Columbians rightly do. Every one of the 3 models on the referendum ballot maintains local representation. In every one of those models, every MLA, not just some of them, every MLA will be accountable either to a local riding or to a region. So even under the MMP model, the Attorney General, to his credit, modified it a little bit. So the countries that currently have MMP are like Germany and New Zealand, where the list members, the 40% who are drawn from the list, tend to be for the whole country. But what we have on the ballot is a modified version of that, where even the list MLAs, will still be regionally based, regional lists. And so that is maintained. And in terms of the scope of that accountability, think about it this way: under mixed member, which is one of the 3 options, 60% of the MLAs will be will be elected the way they are now. The ridings will have to become a little larger in order to make room for the other 40%. How much larger? About 2/3 larger. You know what that means? Basically, they would become equivalent in size to federal ridings. There you go. That's what it becomes. So I think I have been hearing and seeing a lot of misrepresentation from the no sides that says our local accountability will be severed. And I don't think that's true. And in many ways, I think the options that we have before us actually enhance that representation and empower people and give the people more choice than they currently do. So let me speak a little bit to that local representation, because I think geographic proximity matters, but I also think political affinity matters. Let me give you a few examples of that. Back to 2001 again. Now, after that 2001 election, the Gordon Campbell government instituted 3 years of major cuts. Schools were closed, welfare cuts, environment cuts, children and families. I spent a lot of time touring the province in those years, giving talks. And over again, I heard people say the same thing. My MLA has locked their office and won't take a meeting. Okay? It didn't matter if you had a local MLA with an office down the street. You didn't have effective local representation. And I said on the radio this morning, I first went to see my MP when I was 15 years old. And I've been to see my MP and MLAs many times since. Never to get help on a personal matter or for a partisan matter, but as a citizen, to discuss issues. if Suzanne can give me an example of a time when she voted against her party because of those kinds of constituent visits, that would be interesting. But the current reality is that our MLAs function along those party lines now. And I think we would be better off changing that. In terms of the complexity and what people right now, so we have a simple ballot now. But if you go up to many people on the street and you say, how is it that you can have a party win 40% but get 61% of the votes? How is it that a party can win the popular vote but lose the election? How is it that a party can get an increase in the popular vote but lose seats? People can't explain it. I mean, there are all these odd parts of our outcomes. The history that you started with, I think, is important. And what it tells me is that democracy is an evolutionary process and we always strive for constant improvement. And we have one of those chances again. Are there some things that need to be worked out after the vote? Yes, there are. I think we're going to have to entrust nonpartisan bodies like the Elections Boundary Commission, Elections BC, to come up with some of that. But here's what I particularly like, is that we have this confirmation referendum after 2 cycles. If it proves to be problematic, we can choose to go back. But I am very optimistic that we wouldn't choose to go back, because I'm not aware of a single country that has switched to PR that has then voluntarily chosen to switch back, which tells you something about how these countries actually function in practice. The info is coming. It's already started. I think Elections BC is starting to provide that information. They have excellent videos now that they've just posted about each of the systems. My feeling is it takes people about half an hour to get up to speed on the 3 systems. Is that too much to ask people on an important matter like this? I don't think it is. Have we handled, for goodness sake, that was complicated. Suzanne's quite right around Gordon Campbell and the Citizens Assembly on electoral reform. I thought that was a fantastic process and one of the best things Gordon Campbell did. But I also know this. Again, some of you are too young to remember this. I remember when we had that first referendum in 2005, talking to a lot of people, and the conversation went something like this. I can't quite explain STV. I don't quite understand how the voting works, but those people worked really hard, and I'm going to honor their recommendation. And it got 58% on the referendum. We do defer to others some of the time for their expertise. That's okay. And in the second referendum in 2009, it certainly did not do as well. And as Suzanne says, the maps were produced. And in particular, STV did not work well for rural BC. The ridings were too big. Which is what I particularly like about the third option on the ballot this time, the rural-urban option, where we get STV for all of us who live in urban settings. But in rural settings, they would still have mixed member, and so their ridings would just become about the same size as they would be federally now. And again, we get that confirmation referendum. Finally, in terms of the risks that we face, so again, I would simply say, the proof is in the pudding. Countries that have PR like it, and they don't want to switch back to something like we have now. That should tell us something. Interestingly, back to the history point that Suzanne started with. It's interesting, when World War II ended and Germany was occupied, the Allies could have instituted any democratic system they wanted. And it's interesting, is it not, that the United States and England specifically chose not to institute their own systems. They instituted PR. And if you don't think they did that with an eye to how to prevent a repeat of history, think again.
Yes.
The point about the far right and the instability and so on, I'll close with this. How much time do I have?
Less than a minute.
Less than a minute, oh dear. Look, in terms of instability, we all experienced that a bit last summer when there was still some uncertainty for 8 weeks. It was good fun and lots of drama. There were major forest fires. The work of government continued. Our institutions don't continue to function. The outgoing ministers remained the ministers looking after the situation. There are disturbing things happening in Europe right now. I cut my teeth in the anti-racist movement. I'm disturbed by what I see. But I see it happening in both first past the post and in PR countries. Look at Trump, look at Modi, look at what just happened in Quebec, as I was saying, where those are all at risk. We need to tackle those real issues. But the political culture of British Columbia is not going to change overnight if we change our systems. And I trust the values of British Columbians, which are in the main progressive and caring. And I trust that the outcome is going to serve us well. In places like Sweden, which just, where the far right, as Suzanne said, won 17% of the vote a few weeks ago, that's disturbing. In the Netherlands, the far right also won 17% of the vote. The only influence they've had is they've managed to encourage all the other parties to cooperate, to keep them isolated, which is how it usually plays out. But when we look at a country like Sweden, which has had PR for 100 years, we had a raging debate in this country about how many Syrian refugees we would take. We would take 25,000 Syrian refugees in 2015. In Sweden, with a population less than a third of Canada, since 2015, they have taken 300,000. In the face of that, is there an anti-immigrant racist backlash? Yes, there is. But I think we're poorly placed to give them morality lessons and tolerance. Thanks.
To some of the things that Seth has been talking about. First of all, this 40% of the vote and 100% of the power, there are two responses to that. Number one, nobody has 100% of the power. If Justin Trudeau had 100% of the power with his 38 or so % of the vote, he would have that pipeline under construction by now. We have all these constraints in our country. We have constitutional constraints, we have political constraints. Look at the HST. That was a government that had a lot of power at the time. Speaking of Gordon Campbell, he eventually essentially lost his job over that because he tried to bring something in quickly without the support of the public. There was a referendum at that time on the HST. That was the end of the HST, and he did not stay on as premier very much longer. So this 100% of the power is a little bit of a fiction to say that in Canada. It doesn't play out that well. But the other piece of it is 40% of the vote and 100% of the power. That takes me back to my very first point, which is that only applies if the only vote that matters is the vote for the political party. And in British Columbia and in Canada, we vote for people. We don't give away our vote to political parties and say, here, you can deploy this vote for us. So in mixed member proportional, just to go back to mixed member proportional, you're going to have quite large districts in British Columbia. And there will be some people directly elected in those districts. But then to make up this lovely proportionality piece that is so important, you have to fill people into those districts. Well, they're filled in off a party list. Now, we don't know if it's a provincial list or a regional list, notwithstanding what the Attorney General may have said. In fact, if you go to Elections BC materials, it just says it's a party list, and all these things remain to be determined. So I think you've got to leave that remains to be determined. But who gets to be on that party list? You know how they get on the party list in Indonesia? They pay large sums of money. I don't think that will happen in British Columbia. I think that is unlikely. But since we're drawing comparisons around the world of places that aren't such great democracies, I mean, that is PR at its worst. But the point is to get on that list, whether you pay money or whether you are owed favors by your party over the years, that will be an opaque process. That will not be one that any one of you or me control unless we happen to be one of the party insiders. So what you are doing as a voter, when you're voting for a political party, not a person, that's the fundamental difference between PR and what we have now. When you vote for a political party, they get to deploy your people for you. They are taking away your vote and using it for themselves. I think that is a bad idea and a poor form of democracy. In terms of who MLAs represent, they represent everybody. And this thing about who people, in the legislature, people voting against their party or not. First of all, you can, and you all saw Maxime Bernier left his party the other day. He didn't get kicked out. If he was in New Zealand and he left his party, there's a bill in front of the House in New Zealand which would say he actually, not only did he leave his party, he gets kicked out of the legislature, and the party leader gets to put someone in so that you can keep that delicious state of proportionality. That is what That is what the accountability is. That's the fundamental accountability in PR. You are accountable to your party, not to the citizens who voted you in. As an MLA representing your riding, you look after, do we need a new hospital? How about that bridge that's falling down? Those schools that need seismic. Believe me, I heard lots of stuff about seismic in schools in Vancouver, as you might imagine, when I was an MLA. It was a big deal. I do not think I took that back to our Minister of Education and said, you've got to get on with those schools. That is what MLAs do all across British Columbia, because they are responsible to those voters for those issues. So that is what's important as an MLA. They take back those things, and that is what forms their policy when they get in their caucuses in Victoria, is the needs that their community needs. So are those things taken back to Victoria? Absolutely they are. Absolutely. And I defy you to find one MLA in British Columbia, the 87 MLAs in British Columbia, who would deny that. They will all confirm that to be true. They are utterly 100% accountable to and responsible to their voters. That is the system we have now. We should not be giving that up. In terms of countries coming and going between PR and not PR, first of all, if we have a vote a couple of years from now, I mean, no government can bind another government, so we don't even, maybe we would, maybe we wouldn't. But let's take it from my Danish friend. I said to her, so what about this vote? She said, don't do it. It allows in extremists. That is her fundamental argument, and the argument of so many who come from Europe. If you talk to them, they do not want extremists in their legislature. We do not have extremists in our legislature in British Columbia. You know why? Because no riding will vote for them. Nobody wants a crazy person running as their MLA. Voters are smart, and the wisdom of the crowd is smarter. And 87 times around British Columbia, the wisdom of that community chooses the people who go to Victoria for them. That is what we count under our current system. We don't count one provincial vote for political parties, where Vancouver would dominate the legislature. The choices made in Vancouver would control the choices, would control the representation of the whole province. We don't have that. We have 87 separate elections, 87 separate people chosen by their voters and representing them in Victoria. That is a good system. That is a fair system. That is a just system. And that is a system that we should be sticking with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. So I'm sure we have some questions from the audience. We have about 15 minutes, so please raise your hand and please let your question be a question, not a whining rant.
We have half an hour.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you have
Ms.
to go?
Anton has to leave.
Oh, no, no worries.
So-
Oh, my mistake.
Questions? Yes.
Ms. Anton, you served under the cabinet of Christy Clark, who was on record as having supported the implementation of proportional representation. You were a supporter at the time that Premier Campbell instituted the proceedings to go to the STV. Maybe you could explain how come the last two premiers of your party promoted the idea of going to a proportional system and you don't?
Well, I think if you were to ask former Premier Christy Clark, she likes an STV system, but not the systems that are on offer right now, which is quite different. The STV system is a voter-based system. The three systems that we're choosing now are party-based systems, and I do not support one. I can't really purport to speak for the two previous premiers. You really have to ask them, but that's my understanding of Christy's views. Gordon Campbell, I can't say. But I know clearly what my own views are. That's my own.
Over here?
Yes. So on your literature, it says that PR will have MLAs awarded in and not voted in. Both the BC NDP and the BC Liberals, I'm not certain about the BC Greens yet, but they both support open list mixed number proportional, which allows you to physically check off which proportional MLAs will be selected. So why do you say that when you know that both of the parties support it and that they make up the vast majority of the BC legislature?
Well, all I know is it'll be a party list. That's the determination. If we have mixed member, this is going on, whether or not we have mixed member. The dual member, by the way, is impossible to understand. But mixed member, there will be party lists, and that will be a province-wide party list according to Elections BC, and whoever gets on that list to the top of the list is a wonderful place to be. Whether or not voters are expected to be able to pick their way through a whole bunch of names on a party list, it's very problematic, and it's very hard for voters to do that. And as a matter of fact, we have an illustration in Vancouver right now where people are voting for 70 people on a list. Extremely difficult.
If I may just, so first of all, it's true STV, as we had it before, is not on the ballot. The third option for most of us in the province would be STV, other than rural, very large rural ridings. So I actually think it's quite a creative STV option. You know, as I said before, the one downside of STV is that for rural British Columbians, the ridings would be too big, and it fixes that. I really appreciate your point about open list. So in agreement and fairness with Suzanne, that is one of those issues that the Attorney General said would be clarified or decided after, whether it be open list or closed list. But I agree with you that most of the parties have stated that they favor open list. I certainly favor open list. Sounds like if that's the option that's chosen, I would campaign with you for open list. I like how it would empower the voters. And to be honest with you, that was one area where I was disappointed in the current Attorney General. When we made our submission before this process went on, we recommended that he simply say right out of the gate, it's going to be open list. And he didn't, punted it till later. So now we have to fight that out again. But we do have clarity that the list will be regional. And if you go to the Elections BC website, it's clear that the list will be regional.
Well, question in the back here.
Oh, so me? Okay. My question goes to both. So, Suzanne, you say that people wouldn't be able to scan through a list of candidates, or that the systems are complicated, or that nobody understands EMP. So my question is, you go to places like Baden-Württemberg in Germany and it works perfectly fine and people understand it. So are you saying that Canadians and people in British Columbia are not intelligent enough to be able to use those voting systems, or pick through more party choices, or go down the list? I would say, I'm an immigrant here, and I would say that people here are very intelligent.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone here thinks otherwise.
Well, and I would agree with that. But what I'm saying is that our system right now is very easy to understand. Everyone understands it. Any of the three systems on offer, none of them is fully described, so none of us can actually understand how they may play out. And I was speaking to, as a matter of fact, in my previous, when I was elected, I actually was at a dinner party with a German political guy, and I asked him how he got there, and you know what? He couldn't actually explain it to me, because the formulas are complicated. There's a HOMP formula, I actually have a picture of it over there, of the formula, and you do a quotient, and then you divide it, and then I mean, nobody can actually understand that.
Nobody?
Nobody.
Well,
Nobody, 100% nobody, Susan? Come on. You're exaggerating. Because you're using this as a propaganda base for the no side.
As a matter of fact, people sort of have an intuitive understanding of it, but if you were to actually ask them to explain exactly how people get there, they are not able to do that.
I can do it on the board if you want to.
Well, you'll have to explain to British Columbia one.
Next question is from Steph.
No, it's okay.
Okay. Hang on. Yes?
I have a question. If we are confused about the three options, I understand it's okay to just vote yes or no. And if you get a majority of yes, but you've got all over the place on question 2, or not as many people answer, what's going to happen?
So the ballots that we will all get in our mail in about 3 weeks have 2 questions, as you point out. The first question is very straight up. Do you want to keep our current first past the post system, or switch to some form of proportional representation? The second question has these 3 alternatives. As you point out rightly, it's an important point, you don't have to answer the second question if you don't want to. Your ballot would not be spoiled. And conversely, you can vote to keep the current system in the first question and still have an opinion on the second question if you want to. And that second question is ranked. So you rank 1, 2, 3 your preferences. And so it functions as a transferable vote. If none of the 3 win 50% on the first round, then the least popular one drops off and their votes get distributed, and then in the next round, the preference will be established. I can't resist though around the complexity thing, because you alluded to the municipal ballots.
I know what you're going to say.
So the municipal ballots are seat owners.
I may be softening my position on this one.
Okay, well, because the NPA, which was your former municipal party, argued vigorously in favor of the at-large system and against wards. And the geographic boundaries of the at-large system are at least twice the size of any of the models that we have on the ballot.
A question back here?
Yes. Well, first of all, I would like to point out that Baden-Württemberg doesn't actually have a list system. They actually have a closest runner-up system. So
Well, no, that's why I was talking about DMP, and Baden-Württemberg would be the almost the nearest loser, which is the most similar one to the MP. But they're that's why it's
that was just an aside. So it's a fundamental principle of representative democracy that the representatives should be reflecting the view of the elector. So if, say in British Columbia, 5% of our population holds what you're describing as extremist views, then on what basis do you feel justified denying those people their right to representation in the legislature?
So, because I fundamentally disagree that we should be voting for political parties, I think that people should be accountable to their neighborhoods, their communities, and stand up in front of them and say, look, you should be vote for me because I'm great and the other person vote for me. That is how we vote right now. If you have a person whose views are important, they can do a few things. They can work inside a political party and persuade that party to adopt some of their views, or they can run for election themselves. I mean, if they are persuasive, if the views are so persuasive, find somebody who can carry those forward and take them and get elected and take them into the legislature. We have a way of doing that right now, and people get elected, and sometimes they do have kind of out there views. But what we have right now, though, is we have political parties that are coalitions going into the election. BC NDP are a coalition of NDP voters and Greens, probably. I think you could safely say Labour. So when you get an NDP government, you kind of know what you're getting. BC Liberals are always thought to be more business friendly, more into building the economy. When you get a BC Liberal government, you kind of know what you're getting. And those coalitions, when they're presented to the voters before the election, the voters know if they're voting for an NDP candidate. They kind of know where they're going to go. And similarly, if they vote for a Liberal candidate. What happens in PR countries is you don't know what you're going to get after the election, because you have a whole bunch of parties elected. They decide who is the coalition that's going to form government. So voters no longer get to choose the government on election day. That's chosen by the political parties in closed doors, back rooms after the election, and they decide what the policies are going to be. If you've got an NDP government, you've got Premier Horgan, his government decides its policies, and they decide them ahead of time. Same with the Liberals, they decide them ahead of time. But under PR, you don't know who the government's going to be. It doesn't happen on election day, and you don't know what the policies are going to be. The voters are left out entirely of that process.
Except that sometimes we do have minority outcomes in the first past the post, and you get a sense of how it would more often function if we had PR. The NDP has had to compromise. The Green Party has had to compromise. We have a transparent confidence and supply agreement that lays out in black and white, and you can download it on the web, the basis upon which they came to their post-election agreement. I agree with your point. I think if a party is able to secure 5% of the overall provincial vote, they deserve some representation in the legislature. Are there some parties that may succeed at that I find important? Probably. But my feeling is that when these far right tendencies exist, and they find their expression one way or another, and if they don't find expression through their own small parties, they live in our big tent parties, and they wield influence and get dog whistled to, and it's not at all transparent how much influence they actually wield. I think it's clear and more transparent to know exactly how many seats they manage to muster and know exactly how much power they may or may not wield in a coalition. But I'm happy that most of the time what happens in countries with PR is that they're left politically isolated.
My friend in the pink shirt.
Sorry, the first speaker, I forgot your name.
Seth.
Seth. Something I was hoping you would have responded to that was brought up was how this whole process is being brought right now. Like, we hear a lot about the pros and the cons of it, but this whole process seems quite rushed. You know, there's not a lot of information online. There was even an injunction application brought against doing it right now. I was wondering if you could comment not on the benefits of proportional representation, but on if you agree with how the vote is being brought right now.
It's imperfect. It was a little rushed. And once they made the decision to have a mail ballot, they could have given a little bit more space between the municipal elections and the referendum. That's what I think. Is that fatal? No, I don't believe so. I think we're all going to start getting boned up pretty quick in the next little while. The benefit of it being a mail ballot is that all of us are going to get a detailed package in our homes. We're all going to get a ballot from Elections BC. It's going to explain how the ballot works. It's going to offer neutral explanations of the three systems on offer. It will give you links for more information if you want to delve into it. But ultimately, the reason why I particularly like the confirmation referendum is that all of these debates remain a little theoretical. Right? We know what we know until we experience something different. Yes. And what Dave Eby has allowed us to do in the law that he's tabled this week is say, you get to try it out. It won't be theoretical. You're going to get to see it in practice. And if you really don't like it, you're free to switch back.
I think the last question is in the back there.
I guess what I don't get is why we need to have a referendum at all, because
why what?
We need to have a referendum at all at this point in time, because if the system works so well, then what do we even need to have one? Because we have reps in the legislature who get to make this decision, and we don't need to go to the proportional representation, which is the
well, look, I think it's important that there is a referendum. The Green Party did run saying they would just do it. I think, to your point, it is true that both the NDP and the Greens ran saying they wanted to bring in proportional representation. So arguably, there's a mandate there. But on an important matter like this, I think it's reasonable to put it to a referendum.
The referendum is a setup. There's a lot of commentary, including a lot of media commentary, that the fix is in. Because it is not fleshed out. The details are not there. There's no maps. There's no explanation of the three systems. So people cannot actually know what they're voting for. You're voting for a wish.
But there doesn't have to be one, is what I'm saying, under the system.
No, a government with the argument is that Premier Horgan has 100% of the power right now. So he could have just done it, but he might have faced a significant backlash. That's the limit on that so-called 100% of power, because you are always answerable to the public, and if the public gets really mad at you, you're in trouble. So I think they needed to go with a referendum, but having gone with a referendum, they should do it properly. The beauty of our current system, because I'm really sorry, I apologize to everyone, but I really do have to go. The beauty of our current system is the accountability. So Premier Horgan, right now, for example, I'm a BC Liberal, you know that. My partner, Bill Thielman, is a very hardcore NDP. The two of us and our third person are running the No campaign. The beauty of our current system is that whatever Premier Horgan does now, I might dislike it, I might like it, it doesn't matter. In 3 years' time, he has to go back in front of the voters again, and they'll say hurrah and welcome back, or they'll say out you go. That is that throw the bums out phrase. That's what you can do under our current system. Very difficult to do under PR because you lose accountability. You don't know who's actually responsible for decisions when you have those big coalition governments. We have a terrific system now, terrific province. Look at this beautiful place that we're in. We are so fortunate to be here. As I said earlier, our system is not broken. There's nothing to be fixed. Let's keep this stable, just system that we have had in British Columbia that has brought us to such a terrific place. So I thank you very much, and I have to make my decision. Thank you very much.
Both of our debaters have brought some literature which you can pick up. You can also pick up some pizza on your way out, and stay in touch with the Runnymede Society on Twitter and on social media. We have lots of fun things. Thank you.
Okay.